So in a way, it's what's going to be recorded.
Oh, we are. We're definitely. Oh, it's.
Don't stop.
It
It's
may
already
be
started.
recording.
It's
Okay.
been recording for
So it's
4
already
seconds.
recording. Okay, so this is
Yeah.
an HTML class. Let me start my presentation apparently. So we'll kind of explain some of the background of HTML and what it is. Hypertext markup language is what HTML stands for. That's that. What HTML is a way to present ideas. Think of it kind of like Microsoft Word in a way. It's a document presentation model. It allows you to express content and ideas and meanings and things like that, or just tell a story or something like that. So it informs the reader of intent, meaning that you're kind of speaking to an audience. In this case, you're either speaking to the end user who's actually looking at your web page, or you're speaking to Google, who's parsing your web page and trying to decide what piece of information are important. It's structured, meaning it has rules. We'll get to the rules in a little bit, but the structure of it is good because comparatively to, say, Microsoft Word, where there's a lot of different versions, and if you open files in different versions and stuff, there's problems. That's kind of one of the ideas behind HTML way back when it was invented, was to make it so that as long as the clients followed the rules and the developer followed the rules, then everybody would be on the same page, sort of a thing. It includes media. That's the kind of rich hyper stuff that was going on back when it was developed in the 90s, or probably even earlier than that. The text browsers at the time had serious problems. They still have serious problems with linking, with including images or movies and stuff like that in them. Even with doing things as simple as like having a background color and stuff, that's not trivial in Word and other document presentation models like that. And now with XML. XML and HTML have kind of a troubled, storied past behind them, but they've they've merged in a lot of ways, and the XML part is actually somewhat important, and I'll explain XML for just a second here. So I've got a browser here, and I'm actually going ahead there. Let's get. This is an XML document. Think of XML a lot like. Can we read that? It's probably a little small, isn't it?
Kind of. Sorry.
All right, back on course. That was pretty bad. Okay, so XML is a lot like a CSV in that it encodes data or ideas or whatever. But unlike CSV, you can have data nested inside of itself. So we have kind of like a sample schema. This is just a comment. And what this document basically outlines is a book collection. And so there's a library element, which is this one right here. It has one books element. The books element has 0 more book elements. The book has a title, a pages with a count attribute, and a authors attribute. And then the authors is allowed to have multiple authors, like this one that has a couple of authors. You don't have to, but you could have multiple authors. So XML relates to HTML in that they have the same syntax and they follow the same rules. What's special about HTML is that HTML is a subset of XML that's specifically designed for browsers to display them to the end user. So unlike this, where you could read this, a human can read this and say, oh, you know, we have 10 books or whatever, and I can sort of read through them. And it's actually really easy for scripting languages to parse this, meaning to say, count how many books are there, or iterate over the titles, or sort the titles, or something like that. It's very easy. HTML is very easy for a browser to display it to the end user. And it's kind of ideal in a way for that kind of a medium. What HTML is not. It's not the internet. People kind of think that they're the same thing. There's a lot more in the internet than just HTML. They kind of share similarities in HTTP, which is just a protocol for sending data around. That's actually where the hypertext part comes. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. But otherwise, there's not that much to do with HTML being a presentation medium for the internet, other than the fact that it's used a lot on the internet. It's not a programming or scripting language. It encapsulates data and it displays data to the user, but alone HTML has very little to do with actually programming or manipulating data. In fact, most web programming languages like PHP and Python and Perl, those big P's, I guess, are actually really good at manipulating text as their main backend. And the reason that they're good web languages is because they're really good at manipulating text, and that HTML is all text. That's what it's defined as. It's not complicated. Hopefully.
It is every time I look at it.
Kaylee informed me that she doesn't necessarily, nobody necessarily knows what that is. It's a little guy flipping over a table.
I didn't know what it was. You chatted me that yesterday.
Yeah, I did.
He chatted to me too, and then I was like, what is that? And he sent me a GIF of a guy flipping over a table, and I still didn't get it. I was like, haha, that's funny. And then I didn't even know.
HTML is all about tags.
He's so cute.
All tags begin with the lower or less than symbol, and they end with the greater than symbol, as we saw in the XML thing. All tags must begin and end, meaning they have to close. That usually means that they have a closing tag that's got the / right before them. Some tags self-close, so they have the / at the end of the opening tag. That means that they're implicitly, that means that that tag doesn't have any data inside of it. It's just its own thing. So, for example, in the great, I'm going to mess up my slide thing. In this example here, we had pages that has a count attribute, but it doesn't actually have any pages in it. It's just its own element. There's no closing pages tag, and there's no data that's inside of a page as an element. The best examples of that in HTML are images and
Break tags.
Breaking tags. We gotta get through this now because I messed up my slides. Attributes. There are global attributes, which all HTML tags are allowed to have. Those include style, ID, class. Now might be a good time. Well, let's get to this slide so that I don't have to restart the slide. There are special attributes. Those are usually on ones that have no closing tag. So all images need to have a source. You can't just have an image that's just nothing. It has to point to something. It has to have the image data portion. Same thing with links. A link without an href is basically useless because it doesn't actually link to anything. The special attributes make things special. All right. Our first actual glimpse of HTML. Basics tags. So HTML starts with the HTML tag, ends with the HTML, and then most of the time you're going to be working within the body scope. In fact, these parts I don't know what I just drug other than that. These parts actually don't. I hesitated even putting these in because you'll never write these in your day-to-day jobs. When you're programming in HTML, you're writing you're making like an email template, or you're making some copy for a product or something like that. This is already in the document, so you don't need it and you don't want it. In fact, you're not allowed to have more than one HTML tag in your HTML body, so you actually don't want to include tags like this when you're writing copy for a product. The copy that you might want would be things like headings, so H1, H2. I think it goes to H5, maybe even H6. They basically just get smaller and have less importance. Paragraphs, which are kind of the bulk of a text document, are paragraphs. So if we walk through this, we have some comments, we have a master heading. This is the name of the book. We have a chapter heading, which is actually not such a great thing, and we'll find out why making this an H2 isn't so great later on. Some paragraph, which would include the bulk of it, another chapter. And now we have a first of one of our more fun HTML elements. We have an image tag. Has everybody seen a lot of these tags before?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No?
I don't think you two have.
Okay. So these are the bread and butter tags, meaning you're going to see these everywhere. Anytime if you go to a product and you inspect its description or whatever, you're going to see a whole bunch of paragraph tags and a whole bunch of these other tags. This image tag here has a source, which is local to this project, meaning it's in this directory. It's not like it could link to a different web page and put its image there too. And then it has some attributes for the width and the height of that image. And alt is also a good attribute on the image tag. That's basically what would be, well, it's supposed to be what the image is. It's what would be displayed if the image can't load. So if it can't find this image right here, then the alt text would display there instead in like this giant empty box that would be 640 pixels by 410 pixels wide. There would be the words "Hey Seal!" exclamation point.
And it also tells like the browser, or sorry, not the browser, but like Google, for example, what that picture is about.
Yep.
Google doesn't know that you have a picture of an espresso machine unless you're saying.
It's very true, and we'll get more on that in a little bit. This is a link. It's a kind of odd tag actually because it doesn't seem to have any. You would expect it to say link like that. That's actually a tag, but it does something else. It includes that piece of data inside of the document. So these are links that the user uses, meaning they kind of click on it and it goes somewhere. This is how you navigate web pages. It's basically the only way to navigate web pages other than like JavaScript or something like that. And here's another link with another element inside of it. In fact, link elements, they always have something inside of it. Otherwise, again, it's kind of a useless tag without it. Does all of this make sense? Questions? Yes, Brendan.
How come with the image one, when you close it out, IMG doesn't need to be in there?
So this is one of those self-contained tags. It's this one, and there's another one that you'll see a lot, which is like this.
Oh, I see it.
So it's its own closing tag. It's its own thing. It doesn't ever have any child elements. Let's put it that way. There's never anything inside of it. It's just its own thing.
Got it.
Those are the only two really good ones I can think of off the top of my head. I think actually a link tag also can self-close. I don't believe that it needs to have any child elements. In fact, I can guarantee it doesn't need one. Script tags, style tags, all of those need to have closing tags. Sarah.
A for anchor. What exactly does that mean? The A that you have.
A is for anchor.
That's what the tag means. It doesn't have. I mean, we don't use the word anchor very.
Right.
That's why it's called an A tag. It's an anchor for something. Does that? I know it doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to make sense. Link tags are A tags.
Is it possible to show an example of what this looks like? And
Absolutely. So now that we've gotten through that, let's go ahead and do that actually. We can just click here and we'll see. That's what that generates. Does everybody more or less see how we got from one tag to the way that it's displayed? Let's go back and forth.
Yeah.
So we've got this H1, and that's the biggest element on the page. We have two H2s that have a paragraph in the middle of them, and the paragraph itself. We have the seal, and we have a link that's, although below it, HTML is actually mostly white space agnostic, meaning that you can have it kind of in any order. We could have had all of the tags on the same line like this if we wanted to. You know, if I could scroll over there, I could put that on the same line, and they would not change the way that it's that it's displayed here. I could put all the tags all on top of each other on the document. They could be one single line, and it would be displayed exactly the same. The reason that is that the white space agnosticness of it. In this case, the reason that these two elements are right beside each other actually has to do with Safari more than anything else. Safari chooses that a H and A and P tags are all what's called block level tags, this is something we'll actually go over a lot more in detail in like a later class because it's really not that important for how HTML functions. But the user agent in this case, Safari, chooses to display those all on a new line on its own as if it's its own thing, which is why this tag down here goes onto its own line as well. So there's the link tag down here is on its own line versus the link up here that's not. That's just because this link here isn't block level because Safari chose it to be that way. One of the first things that any web programmer will do when they're starting a new project or whatever is kind of define which ones are considered block level so that the browser itself doesn't make that designation for you. It's really not that important as long as you just kind of know that that's just why it's like that, is the browser chose it to be that way in this case. Does that all make sense? I see everybody's kind of confused. Yeah.
This might be a really dumb question, but go back to the other one. Yeah. So it says hey seal. So if the image wasn't showing, it would just say hey seal. Is that what you were saying earlier? Yep.
Hi, seal.
Hey.
I like it when the seal's there, though.
Me too.
Yeah, let's change it back. You'll note that I'm using a commercially available editor, and so it's actually doing a lot of things for me that are really nice. For example, it's highlighting this because that's not actually there. It's telling me that. You generally won't have that. Same with those. Those don't link anywhere, so it's highlighting them to tell me that those would be broken links. So if we actually clicked on it, it would be a 404.
So you said you were using a commercially available
Editor, yeah.
editor?
You can use a
So
plain text
what
editor
does
too.
this look like before you did anything? Like when you just go into... Is that a dumb question?
It's just a blank text file. HTML is pure text, so it's just a text editor. You could do exactly the same stuff with TextEdit,
Which is just on your computers.
with one caveat that you would have to go to view or format, I guess, and say make plain text. Because otherwise it tries to do all of that style stuff for you. It tries to be able to make words bold and stuff, but that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to write text that tells the client what should be bold.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
What would you have to do if you wanted more books to be on its own line?
If you wanted more books to
Yeah.
be on something?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To
There's
separate
a lot
the
of
seal.
things. There's a lot of things that you could do. You could make a style tag or use CSS and say display block. That'll make it go onto its own line.
Could you replicate what you did with five great books below it? Oh, there we go, and then it's by itself. I see.
There again, that choice is arbitrary. The browser made that choice for you.
That's what.
That's why most of the time when you're working on an actual HTML page, you're not going to let the browser decide how it's going to display something. You're going to explicitly tell the browser how it wants to be displayed. And that's what this particular style tag would do, is that we're saying this link should be displayed as if it's its own block. And thus it goes to a new line.
I see.
We could tell them all that they should be displayed as inline, and then they would all collapse up onto a giant heaping mess.
Seems like something you wouldn't want to do.
I should be looking down. It's so much easier.
That was advanced.
So are we never gonna? We're probably never gonna have to actually create one from scratch and actually just like a doc type HTML. Blah, blah, blah.
Right. No. Yeah. So the only reason that this
So pretty.
literally isn't a whole line of mess is because the fact that the
seal's
seal
in
is
the
too
way.
big, and so it pushed it onto a new line. And I'm actually not 100% sure why. Maybe we have to define style tags as being displayed on. What I'm looking at right now is that it actually displayed my style, which is pretty weird. There you go. It should be more like that. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's go back over into the presentation. Okay, it's all about intent. Google is your blind friend.
Yes.
Okay, when I said that HTML provides intent to the client, this is what we mean with SEO and things like that. Kind of going back into high school where you would write a paper and you would say, you know, your first sentence or whatever has to be the most important and everything has to reinforce that one idea. That's what the H1 is. The H1 tag in any document is the most important. It should be effectively the title of the document, and everything else on that page should in some way affect your understanding of that title. So if your title is about a book, a specific book or something, then everything in that document really should be about that book, with some caveats. You have other heading tags. Those should be kind of key ideas that, again, reinforce the H1. They can be also key ideas about a section that maybe diverged a little bit about the H1 or something like that. But again, in general, you have one H1, you have a couple of H2s, you have a couple of H3s, if you need them. You don't necessarily need them. And then you have paragraphs and list items, which we haven't done, that support the H1. Images and styles, meaning things like bold or whatever, are useless. And by useless, I mean that they're useless because Google's your blind friend, and he doesn't see the images. You can put alt text on them, but it's not as important as having, say, actual text on the document. Sometimes you need to use images, and you should have alt text on pretty much all of your images. Any image that you want to actually be important should have an alt text. If you don't have an alt text on it, you just threw away. That's just for the user that can see. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Following the rules. Same document, the comments are different. So this titles the document. This gives direction to the reader, in this case, either the end user or Google. If Google is indexing the site and you want it to show up, you want Tale of Two Cities to show up as the number one, you want this document to show up for as number one when you search for that, then this should reinforce it, which is why this is actually kind of a bad tag. This is a dead tag for SEO purposes because chapter 1 is useless for the reader. Nobody cares that it's chapter 1. That might as well be a paragraph tag that has special big styling or something like that. Does that make sense? So just because it's H2 and it's big doesn't necessarily mean it's actually important. So you should choose and pick and choose what goes into an H2 or an H3 tag or something based on what you want it to say to the end user, not on the style that you want that to look like. If it should be big but it's not important, make it a paragraph or something like that, and just make it big. You can make it big through other means. So this would tell the story. Again, reinforcing the H1. More direction should be reinforcing the H1. The seal here has the alt text, so the browser, or sorry, the blind person or Google will know that there is a picture of a seal here. He'll even know it's an image too, by the way. So you know when you go to Google and you search for something and you hit the images tag and you see all the things that are like that. That's where it got that from. It's not like it looked at the image through robot eyes and decided that was a picture of a seal. It got it through the alt text or surrounding text that described the image. Google's pretty smart. Whenever you link to something in HTML, you're passing off some of your SEO. And that's kind of an advanced thing that we don't really need to worry about per se, but if you're writing copy for a product, you should think about it. That if you're going to link to a third-party manufacturer, you're basically saying that this is an authority on this subject. unless you include something like rel no follow or something like that. You're effectively telling Google or the user of the thing that I believe this to be related or important to the subject, especially if you put it in an H. Because of the fact that this is in an H, we're basically saying this is the #1 authority on whatever we're linking to. We want to say to Google, this is highly rated. Again, kind of abstract and not that super important for our purposes. Any questions at this point? Yes, Sarah.
All of the features and functionalities. Well, I'm assuming you're familiar with all like the products, like and everything. They're all-
I'm not familiar with all the
I
products.
set up the templates.
So
for
do
the
you, okay,
products.
so the H2 is fine for like features and functionalities and stuff like that.
Yeah, because we're supporting the fact that we're talking about that machine. So
Okay.
the H1 is like the product name, like Cynthia Cappuccino,
Okay.
and then the H2 is supporting. This is the features and functionality of the Cynthia Cappuccino. It's still
Okay.
referring to the product.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just wanted to
Pass
make
it
sure.
down.
I was like, either if that's not right, I feel like I'm supposed to
No, no, you do not. We would probably write a script for that instead of making you manually do it.
I appreciate that.
If you've asked a question, raise your hand, because I haven't honestly been paying that much attention.
I think you gave candy to everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to be better about that. Yeah, so features and functionality. They're features and functionality of whatever the H1 of that page is, and I hope it's the product title.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It probably
it
is.
is.
Yeah.
It is.
So that's the important part. It doesn't necessarily have to be jam-packed with keywords on its own, as long as it's actually supporting the H1 in some way,
Okay.
some meaningful fashion. One thing we can go ahead and launch into. Whenever you have a tag that you want to learn more about, the authority on that is the W3C or the W3.org. I believe this stands for World Wide Web, meaning three W's. I'm not
No one will
100%
ever
sure on that,
know.
but I think that it does. Google's also obviously a friend as well. So if I search for image, this is Google, but it's scoped to the W3.org site. Then these are these attributes that I was talking about. So permitted attributes, global attributes, obviously we know that because they're allowed on everything. And then the super important ones like source, alt, height, width, etc. Not all elements have these. In fact, most of them don't. Most of them don't have these. I think title's actually a global element, but people don't use it very much, and I don't think people should use it very much because it's hard to style and it's ugly. Title, for those of you that don't know, I guess if we give like an image, if we give this a title.
Yeah, we don't use titles in like anything we do because they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we hover, it'll get a little hover title thing somewhere.
You refresh.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think you typed title.
oh,
That would do
good
it.
call. Yeah, look at even highlighted it. It was like you mistyped that. Good call. Here you go. Here.
You got a peanut butter cup.
Oh,
So lucky.
didn't even try on that.
She was laughing too hard.
Refresh.
Yeah, it's really.
Why is your dad?
There it is. On face value, it seems super useful because you can give yourself like little hover tips like that. But in reality, you have very, very, very limited ability to style those. So unless you love the way Safari, Firefox, i.e. all of them, unless you love the way all of them display that, then don't use them because they're all going to display in their own way, and you can't really override that behavior. HTML entities.
Huh?
Read that a couple times. Basically, the idea to get here is that the less than symbol and the greater than symbol are reserved. So you can't just have those in a copy that are inside of a paragraph or something like that. So how do you get around that limitation? You have what's called an HTML entity, which is a ampersand followed by some characters and then a semicolon. That whole block, that 4-character block right there, is called an entity. in HTML. And when it's rendered for the user, it will be replaced by the actual character itself. So if they copy it and paste it, they'll get a less than symbol, not a ampersand LT semicolon. They'll get an actual less than symbol. But you can severely malign your HTML by including less than symbols inside of actual copy. And especially if you're not using a really, really nice text editor, you probably won't notice. Meaning you'll go and refresh the page, everything will be messed up, and you'll say, why does it look like this? The HTML looks perfectly fine to me. Well, it doesn't if you're an HTML browser, because you probably have a less than symbol in there, or a greater than symbol. And the ampersand. Why? Because it's another one of those reserved, because it's the beginning of an HTML entity. So it's its own HTML entity. HTML is mostly white space agnostic, meaning that single spaces here and there will move inline elements around by a space, but 5 of them in a row don't move it over 5 spaces. And that's why this little guy is super, super useful if you just need to bump something over. You feel free to use it. I don't think there's any penalty, Kaylee. Yeah,
No.
I don't think so. It makes your code look wonky, but if you need to move something and you don't want to buckle down and get some padding or margin or something on that block, then an ampersand NBSP, non-breaking space, is your best friend for that very, very special
In fact, I
time.
think that's how way back in the day people used to style whole websites with like non-breaking spaces and stuff.
People
Don't
used to
do that.
style websites with a bunch of things. Whoa, what happened? That's not the end. Yes?
So do you have to use those exact letters? Like you have to use that's ampersands. You have to use that to make that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you wanted to encode, say, this whole HTML entity in HTML, you would do and amp semicolon amp semicolon, because the amp semicolon is not special at all. It's the ampersand that's the special part, and the reason it's special is because it starts an HTML entity. There's a whole bunch. These aren't the only ones. There's ways to encode a whole bunch of things that you used to not be able to have encoded because of text encoding reasons, meaning the ASCII text only had 127 characters in it, most of which were taken up by the English letters of the alphabet. So if you needed a N with a Nino on it or a E with an accent of GU on it, you would use an HTML entity for that. Nowadays, you actually don't have to do that because most web pages are actually Unicode or something like that you can just encode the character in. So these are really the most important ones to know.
But you're right, though. You can do a lot of stuff. Not necessarily saying you should, but you can do a lot of stuff. Like you can look up these HTML entities and find ways like you can display hearts and stars and all sorts of stuff in your HTML by using those.
Yeah, there's some special ones like Racquo or whatever that are like they're like quote marks built out of the less than greater than symbols. They're like really close to each other. Like there's ones like that people use a lot of. I don't know why, but I broke my. Oh, that's actually the end. Okay, time to go into more tags. Now that we know more about attributes and these other things. Did I actually skip?
Nope.
I missed. I should have had another demo in there, but that's all right. Let's go. Let's do it. So, let's look at more tags. Okay, this is one of my favorite tags, the unordered list, which is the U is unordered and L is list. So you can always remember that. UL is unordered list. Unordered lists by themselves don't do anything. They are one of those tags like the books, the authors tags. Authors tags itself, as defined in here, is useless without an actual author element inside of it. Think of the authors as basically being your UL. Without list items in a UL, the UL itself is completely worthless, and the list items have to be inside of a UL. You could probably try to shoehorn a P in there or something, but it's not right. The idea is that you're having a collection of somewhat related items that you want to display in list fashion, or you want to group together in list fashion. There's also a similar accompanied one called an ordered list, which is OL, And just like that, it has to have one or more list items in it for it to be of any use.
It automatically puts 1, 2.
It does. Let's view it, and then we'll try to ignore everything below the first unordered list. Okay, so by default, unordered lists have little dots beside it. It's a bulleted list, basically. Doesn't have to. You can take that out with styling. Most people do, because most people use lists for things that are more taxing than just a literal list of things. Like a list of links is basically how you do a navigation for a web page. Like if we go to this, all of this is lists on lists on lists. Why is this not loading? There we go. So this top one's a list. This one's a list. The lists have lists inside of them that make up this. That's all of that navigation is just lists. And it's really good for Google. Google gets away with it because it can parse lists really easily and knows how all of those relate upwards in a tree. So it knows that, oh, I should sign up. It knows that semi-automatics in this case is a semi-automatic espresso machine because it's underneath espresso machine. So it kind of inherits the scoping of the higher elements. You can, again, just like we just sort of discussed, you can put lists inside of lists. So you could have a list with a list item, first steps, something, you know, more stuff. You can even mix ordered lists inside of unordered lists. It doesn't matter because once you have a list item, you can put whatever you want in it. In reality, we can see what that looks like real fast. So we have an unordered list with bullets, and we have an ordered list inside of it, and we have another ordered list, and you'll note that the browser Safari is kind enough to present us with slightly different styling so that we can kind of keep track of how many levels they've been nested inside of themselves. You can override all that with style. Steven, go. Oh, I thought you were. Oh, sorry, I thought you were.
You just moved your hand.
Sorry, I had a little cut on my fingers.
This is actually probably not the best way to do this. Namely that this list should probably actually be inside of this one. Like that. And then if we save this and go over and refresh it, it'll be displayed slightly different because
you don't
now...
get that second dot.
And the same thing for this one, but I won't bother fixing it. But the idea is that a list item can contain another list, and it can also contain text. And if the next element after that text is block level, then it's going to get its own line, and it's going to look like that. And you can do that ad nauseum down to make an infinitely more complicated list than that. So what are inline elements? Inline elements, of which there are relatively few that you'll ever use, are typically modify something that's inside of a different element. So for example, if we have a paragraph tag here, why isn't it doing my scope highlighting? I have to get it into its own lines. There it is. Oh, it's just light. So it has a red outline, but it's hard to see. Inside this paragraph, we have the text. And Google will read the text all as one line. So Google would read, pet the dog softly or not, period, or not. Now, we're basically telling Google that the word softly is of some kind of importance, and we're telling that the word not is emphatic or emphasized to them. That's basically what these two tags mean.
Emphasize instead of, you can do bold, right? Like B?
No, don't do bold.
Why?
So it should be strong. Strong is usually presented as bold, meaning that it strengthens a message or word. Emphasis is typically italic. You can actually make them look however you want. You could make strong emphasis, strong, bold, and italic. You can make it just italic. You can make it underlined. You can do whatever you want. But what they're telling the reader, in this case Google or somebody that can't see what you're meaning, what it's telling them is that this is well, just like the strengthened idea versus emphasized idea. Obviously, those two words are practically synonymous with each other, so don't really worry too much about that. Break is also an inline. Real fast, let's talk about the bold thing. So she's referring to a tag that has very similar. Let's go on this. Oh, we actually missed the break tag. I didn't even see it. I just glossed right over it. So as we know, the P is going to be all on its own line until it encounters some kind of a barrier and it has to wrap to a new line. But this BR right here is a break element. It's like a carriage return. It's basically the same thing as hitting a carriage return. It's going to start over on a new line. It doesn't have any size. So P's usually do have some top or bottom margin to kind of keep them away from each other. So if you make P's and you make 5 of them in a row, you should have used a list. But since you didn't, you now have like these weird giant spaced out like lines all on their own. And if that's not the way you wanted to present them, you could use a break to present them that way on their own. Meaning 5 individual lines that probably should have been a list. You could display them on their own lines with the breaking tags. Does this make sense?
I'm
Yeah.
not supposed to use bold, I'm supposed to use strong.
Yes, sorry. Okay. So the bold tag is purely, which looks like this. And the italic tag, which looks like this. Those tags are super old and nobody likes them now.
Poor tags.
Poor tags. Those tags are pure style tags, meaning that they don't tell Google anything. You could use them to display something slightly differently, but they're like an image in that unless you can physically see them, they're worthless.
So they don't pass any meaning to Google.
Yeah.
Or, I guess. Is what
But you can see it on the front end that it's bolded, right?
You can, yeah.
That's all that matters. No, I'm kidding.
I feel like she gets more candy for fighting this one out.
No.
She's figured out the system.
Does that make sense to everybody? There are some tags that are said to be kind of deprecated or off limits or something that nobody uses nowadays because of the fact that they don't have impact and nobody really wants their value anymore. They don't pass value, as Kaylee would say. There are some generic placeholder tags which are really fun. Span being one of them. It's an inline element that allows you to just wrap around something to give it some style. That's basically what bold is, by the way. The B tag and the I tag or whatever are basically this style of tag. They don't impart any meaning to Google, but they impart meaning to the user. So you could use this to say underline or make this word red or something like that. The other super major generic tag is the div, which is mostly used for containing things. It's to give, if you wanted to have some indentation or something, you could wrap it all with a div and give that one div some indentation or something like that. Most web pages are built on divs nowadays, meaning that they used to use more tables, now we use divs. They don't have any particular meaning to Google. They don't have any real meaning to the end user too. In fact, you wouldn't even see them if they don't have any style on them. They would just be, they're just wrapping elements in there. Does that make sense? Sort of? That's kind of an abstract one without seeing it. So let's go see it. So we have the color, what?
I think I almost had a question, but then
Okay. We have the color red, and then this other one, which is a container that has an image of a dog inside of another container, and then has a title that is like this, is displayed like that. So divs allow you great power over the layout of your document without impacting what Google or anybody else sees for that document. Does that make sense?
And you're referring to Google for SEO purposes, correct?
Yeah, I don't care about the other ones. I don't think anybody else does either.
Bing and Yahoo.
Those were styled with this special tag, which you'll come across, which is a style tag. This is a different language. This is not HTML. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time in this particular day. What time is it now?
You have
I don't
10
see it.
minutes.
I have 10 minutes-ish. Great. So we won't really care about this, but this is the language that you use to describe how something should look, not what it should mean. Does that make sense? Because
So it's more
that's
for
the key definition
styling
there.
parts of the
Mhm.
website and
It's for styling, not for
makes it
intent.
pretty for end users.
Tables. You'll see this from time to time. Hopefully not around me, no. But so what does a table mean? It's a collection of tabular data, as I said in this comment right here. If it doesn't make sense for it to be in Excel or something, it probably shouldn't be in a table.
So some people use tables to put like, instead of using divs like he was saying to arrange things on the page, some people will actually use tables to force things to be in certain positions. That's not actually what it's for.
Here's how that very generic table looks. In other browsers, this table would have outlines. Because I didn't specifically
way
take away the
cooler.
outlines. Most other browsers, including Internet Explorer and stuff, would have outlines on that table. Boop, boop. That was something we made. Okay, so here's where the bulk of the participation will come in. I am going to make this grayscale and increase the contrast so that you can't cheat by seeing the highlighting.
I know.
Okay, what is wrong with this? Sarah, go.
It doesn't have a closing paragraph for one.
Great.
And then you like list things. Can I say another thing?
Yeah, sure, but you only get one.
Oh,
So
well,
maybe you
move
should,
on.
yeah,
Let
pass
somebody
off.
else.
Anybody else? Is there anything else wrong with this one?
Not another closing paragraph.
Piggybacker.
What?
Should the last HTML, should the backslash be at the end?
No.
Okay, got it.
I think that's actually probably the only thing that's wrong with it, is that we're basically missing paragraph tags. It's, what?
Nothing. It's funny 'cause everybody's looking for the other thing and there isn't one.
It's the,
That's what there's a 2 closing paragraph tags.
no.
I see.
That is the only bad thing on this one. So, good job, Sarah. You spotted it. Both of them. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. New test. Kaylee.
I don't think I want to answer. I don't want to give somebody else a chance.
Anybody see
There's
anything
no
wrong with
closing
it?
paragraph.
Don't guess. You don't get candy. You get candy taken away.
What?
This
You
one,
just guessed they're all here.
this one is somewhat valid HTML. It may or may not be valid HTML, but there's actually an intent problem with this one. Do you know it?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
It's there shouldn't be a paragraph inside of the.
Exactly. Thank you. There we go.
Because it's like gonna say little and then below it it's gonna say.
You don't use elements like H1 and P to do style. Bottom line. Those elements are used for the documentation purpose of your document, for telling Google or whatever what those elements look like. You don't use P just to make something small. There's actually a tag called small that's just like the strong tag, but the other way around. But you still wouldn't use that here. There's no reason to try to modify this one. If you had to make little be little, you would use a span because it doesn't mean anything. And then you could style it the way you want it to. Does that make sense? All right.
Does that even work? Like,
wanna open it?
Browsers will probably attempt to read that, yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is that browsers, so
Yeah, 'cause
actually
it just
because of the fact that
separates
they're
it.
two
Yeah,
block
it's a
levels, it
paragraph.
actually made that on 2 lines. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, they're actually the same size because the priority of H2 or H1 or whatever it was overrode the priority for P as far as the styling for the browser. So browsers will render it, doesn't mean it's right. Browsers will try to render anything. Like if we took out this P right here, browser doesn't care.
Yeah.
Browser doesn't care. It's on 1 line now, but it's still not right.
though.
In fact, if we inspect element in here, it actually just closed it for us because
So browsers will try to
browser's
guess
smart, yes.
at how if it sees like there are mistakes, it'll try to guess.
That's actually not a guess. That's the
Wow.
only place that P could be that it would still be
the
considered
only place.
valid. Why? Because they can't overlap.
But I
P's
guess
can't
the
overlap
point
with
though
PH.
is that you don't ever want to let a browser guess because you don't know what it's going to do when it guesses. Right?
Definitely right, and this could have been a much more severe rendering issue. Let's close close that. Let's go back over. What was that? 3, 2, 3. Spot the difference.
I don't want to do it. I want somebody else to get it.
Is it a guess?
No,
Or do you
it's
have a
not.
meaning behind it?
I have.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
I don't see the HTML isn't closed out. It's still like a normal at the bottom.
Very good. Great. Snickers. Highly coveted.
Sarah's
This
gonna go
one
into a
Should
sugar
be
coma.
like this. That was yours, Brendan.
I know.
You almost got that. You almost got that on the last one. It was actually not wrong. There's actually another problem here.
Hold it. I'll find it.
No one answered.
This is more subtle.
Yeah.
I will help you out a little bit. There is not a syntax error on this document, meaning that all of the HTML is valid HTML. So what could it
Is
be?
it, that order's incorrect? No.
No, that's a good guess, but no. In this case, the elements are valid. They are valid HTML. It will render just fine. The rendering is not the issue here. In fact, let's just render it. So yeah, render is just fine. So what could be the problem here?
I have a guess.
Let's hear it, Sarah.
I think it's
Do
two.
you not like spaces in between stuff?
Nope, it's white space agnostic.
Okay.
So it can look as much as it wants. In fact, you can even have all of these on their own lines too if you wanted to. It does not care. In fact, the very first thing you should do whenever you have a rendering problem is you should try to put spaces on everything on its own line and indent it properly, because that'll tell you, you'll be able to visualize the problem if there's a rendering problem. But again, this is all valid HTML. Kaylee. What?
I don't know. You wanna-
You guys can stop waiting on me. I don't know.
Kaylee.
This isn't tabular data.
Thank you.
You don't want to display content that way.
Thank you.
You could just as easily do a list.
This should be a list.
Oh.
This begs to be a list. It should be a list. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not give
Can
you
I
the
have something
candy you
else?
wanted?
Can I either
Jeez.
have a almond joy, Snickers, or Twix? Thank you.
Wait,
Oh.
No, you can. Oh man, I started mute.
Playing over
Over here.
My bag of chocolates. Whatever.
Does everybody understand why this shouldn't be a table?
Tables are evil.
Why are tables evil? I agree, but why?
Because our current template is evil. It has a lot of tables in it.
Tables are bad style.
Talking about
Tables.
email.
People use tables to do things like this when they didn't need to be. This could be half as long if it was a list. Half as many characters if it was a list. And it would have more meaning. Table's bad. Almost always. Honestly, there's almost never a reason to use table. If it's going to be presented to Google and you want that to be an actual document people use, you should almost never use table. It's very rare to have the need to use a table. Unless it's literally a table. Like you're... I'm sorry?
Just because it's messy, is that the reason, or just?
Because it doesn't have the meaning.
meaning.
The table should have a meaning if it's a table. And this one clearly does not, because it's a list. It's literally a list. It's a list of books. So it is messy, and it's just bad style. What are we on? 4?
3. So 4 is what we need.
Perfect. This one's ugly. I will give you a hint. This HTML is closed. I had to scroll to check because I was like, I don't know what I did on here.
It's not even in English, man.
It is not, but that shouldn't matter.
Come on,
That
man.
a proper XML client will be able to read this regardless. This one may have a couple of problems, so I'm getting ready to dole it out. Yes.
Isn't there supposed to be an opening paragraph, right? Is that ended, so don't you need another opening?
First problem solved.
Bam! I knew that one too. What is
So
I'm
say
really
it.
proud of myself, but I don't know what's going on.
You don't know what's going on? It's okay.
That also means I should point out that it needs a closing one. How did you miss that one? I get candy for that one.
You get
I
candy.
know.
So anytime you say, oh, there's a missing opening one, then you should be basically saying at the same time, is there a closing one that's all that doesn't have its corresponding opening one? In this case, it didn't have either. It was just a completely junk block of text, which isn't invalid per se, but it is for our purposes. There's more problem.
Let's do one more.
Kaylee?
Well, somebody else to answer it.
Oh my gosh. Terry, come on.
Is there a problem with it starting with span and ending with body? Or is that not a problem?
That's similar, but span needs to close, right? So where's the close for span?
There's not one.
Ah! Problem solved.
Yes!
Where does the span need to close? Or at least where should it probably close? Where does it have to close before? It has to close before this close right here. We can't put the span here. We can't put the span here. We can't put the span anywhere behind this character right here because it's not valid HTML anymore if we do that. They can't overlap. We can't have like elements that overlap each other. They have to be fully nested or not nested at all. Can't overlap.
Span.
Doesn't mean anything.
But what does it do? Why is it there?
It's one of the generic ones that you use for styling mostly.
In this case, he didn't put any.
In this case, I don't have any styling. I don't need styling. I can wrap anything in span. As long as it fully encloses it. Not partial. Are we done? I feel like it is, but let's re-indent this.
This thing is so hot. Going higher into my eyes, drying them out.
That feels good.
This is gonna be alright.
No.
That didn't help that much. Let's ignore it. Last one. Do believe that was the end of that one, but I was going to try to get it to re-indent it for us so we can validate it with our eyes. This one's somewhat subtle. This one's actually the one that I had to turn on black and white because otherwise it was way too obvious in black and white. Color.
It's way too not obvious, not black and white.
Let's start with the basics. Does every tag open and close itself? No? Which one doesn't?
It doesn't look like that P is complete next to class.
This
But
P?
It's all
Is it
It's
in
all
it?
with,
image.
yeah.
Image, and then, because there is an ending, but where's the other little?
This one here?
Yeah, because isn't it supposed to have another?
It does. So that's
Yeah,
this
that-
one.
That's the beginning and
That's
the
that's
end.
one.
Oh,
You
there
can't
we
see
go.
my highlighting. I'm highlighting right now.
Sorry.
Highlighting it. It's from this open. Everything starts with a less than and ends with a greater than. So this is a tag. This is its closing tag. So can we all agree that all the tags open and close properly? Or is there any hold out?
I think we're in agreement on that one.
I think it's all, yeah. It's not.
So they all do. Let's go ahead. And, sorry, let's go ahead and move on.
Oh.
They all open and close. So what else could be the problem? If they all open and close, what are the other rules? What are the other rules? It's not rhetorical.
Well, they're not overlapping.
No, that doesn't help,
No,
right?
that's
Because
just-
we already validated all those. How about this one? How about we look at the way it looks? Does that help?
That seal is right.
It's scary.
So what were we trying to do with this? We have a container. We have an image that's size 640. We have a height 410. We have a paragraph that's width is 640. Is the paragraph width 640 though? We expect it to be the same width as the image, right? Why isn't it? Too subtle. Width is not an attribute for paragraph tags. People use attributes sometimes because they see them in other tags and they'll use them in anywhere they want. It doesn't work that way. They used to be width and other some of those archaic ones like that used to be much more generic before CSS, meaning that paragraphs and anything could have a width. Nowadays we don't do that, and in fact, as we know, the browser doesn't even follow it anymore because that's not valid HTML. So the takeaway here is that overshot it. See how it's highlighted? That's because it's not a valid tag, and that's why the highlighting gives it away. But don't rely on attributes to do your dirty work for you. If it doesn't look the way it should, then there's a pretty good chance. So if the reason that it doesn't look the way it should is because you're relying on an attribute, probably that attribute doesn't work on that like type of tag. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, where do you find those? You go to the W3 here, and you find a page that has a search bar because we can't do that. And we say P, and hopefully it'll agree with me. Oh, what is this? It's like looking at Minecraft. I wanted the one that's right below it. Okay. So it can take global ones. What other elements can it, or what other attributes can it take? Nothing. Please don't have any attributes, apparently.
However, if you go back to that, your code, you could have just as easily put the style up in the div class, right?
Sure. This
And then it
style
would
up here
have
could have
kept
been
it.
640.
Yeah,
The-
exactly.
I guess the point is that this is a very common mistake that I see when people will say, why isn't this doing X? It's usually because they relied on X to come from something that X doesn't actually do.
I actually think they have somebody else has the comments right
Oh,
now.
that's okay, because we're all done.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Jared.
If you guys want to trade your candy for different candies, we might let you.